And just to set a little bit the context and provide a little bit of background on the work that we've been doing in the Strength for Diversity project over several years and how it can apply and help in the Ukrainian situation. So just to a little bit of context, by the end of 2021, there were almost 90 million forcibly displaced worldwide. This includes refugees, but also internally displaced people, asylum seekers, and Venezuelans displaced abroad. From this number, the demographics of people who have been forcibly displaced, there's about 53% are adults, about 41% are children, most equally split between boys and girls, and about 6% are those above 60. The situation in Ukraine is a little bit different. There has been many, of course, refugees coming, especially to European countries, but increasing also now to other countries. And many countries have been receiving huge absolute numbers of refugees, especially countries such as Poland, Germany, and Czech Republic. But there are many other countries who have had relative numbers and per capita, in comparison capita, have had considerable numbers of refugees coming from Ukraine. About 3.5 million refugees from Ukraine registered for temporary protection. There have been over 8 million border crossing from Ukraine, but also 3 million border crossing to Ukraine. And estimates indicated perhaps 8 million of Ukrainians have been internally displaced since the beginning of the war. What is different perhaps with this crisis is that this has been, in terms of size and geography, this has been a very important crisis, and there's been the largest refugee flows in Europe since World War II. It's also different in terms of the demographics. It's especially women and children who have come, who have left Ukraine. And this has also implication not only for education system, but also for labor markets, for example. So what have we learned over the years from earlier crises? It's very important to provide opportunities and address needs of refugee students in terms of the learning needs. So not only provide opportunities to learn host country language, but also developing mother tongue of refugees. It's also key that refugee students are able to overcome interruptions in schooling, in some cases more limited education, adjust to a new education system. And they also need to communicate with others, feel a sense of belonging, and develop a strong personal identity. And not to forget, they need to feel safe and learn to cope with loss, separation, and or trauma. We have developed a framework, kind of a holistic model, which looks at addressing all these learning, social, and emotional needs and the different policies and practices that can help to respond to these needs. So how can countries support refugee students from Ukraine? There's been a lot already happening. The European Union law requires that the newcomers are registered in host country within 3 months of moving. There have been some flexibility, but there's already many preparations ongoing in countries for summer camps, summer schools, and we'll hear more about that soon. Host countries also need to develop compatible system and flexible pathways, since many of these refugees might be returning to Ukraine in the future. And there are already opportunities to learn Ukrainian language, history, and culture, but also follow the Ukrainian curriculum. It will also be necessary to have a flexible recognition of student qualifications at all levels of education, and there are already some guidelines in place for different levels. The social emotional needs of refugee students are also very key and need to be addressed, and they might be long lasting. So many countries also providing counseling opportunities, but it's also crucial to provide opportunities for social interactions for students through extracurricular activities or buddy systems. Besides refugee students, another important group are supporting the teachers who are supporting the Ukrainian refugee students, but also engaging Ukrainian refugee teachers. And there's been already many resources for teachers through websites and links of how to welcome students, but also how to talk about the invasion and how to learn basic Ukrainian, work with translation apps, and include language games. And there are also resources through the Interagency Network for Education in Emergencies, which can help teachers work with traumatized students. The Ukrainian refugee teachers, there's also a considerable group in many host countries, and there are already many national measures to employ them. especially at the short and temporary term. We'll hear more about that soon as well. But in the long term, these refugee teachers need to become fluent in the host country language and learn to teach the national curriculum, which will create many challenges. And that brings me to the last point. What are some of the challenges for education system in host countries? There are many, but just focus on three. One is the education planning. So the administrative problems of enrolling children, including them in the national education system. Many of the refugees have been covered through temporary protection. Don't often have a fixed address, are moving around. So it's very hard to actually know where they are, and then creates challenges of how to enroll them in schools. Second major challenge is on capacity. Many of the schools are also already running out of capacity. And there are not only capacity issues in terms of spaces in schools, for instance, but also in terms of teachers. There are many countries have teacher shortages, and it's another challenge is to ensure that the teachers are able to support refugee students with their particular needs. And then the last main challenge is the mental health and psychological support. There is a high prevalence of stress and trauma among Ukrainian refugee students. Our UNHCR colleagues have coined it the double traumatism, because many of those students were displaced internally in Ukraine, and in a second step then left Ukraine and are now living in host countries. So many have experienced this double traumatism, and their parents, and especially mothers, often are also suffering from mental health conditions. So this creates additional challenges. So I will finish here, and we'll hear much more about these issues from my colleagues Abel and Vivian. Thank you.